Hollow Knight is one of my favorite games of all time. It is a game all about exploration, change, and perseverance. I won't get too heavy into these themes because that is a video for another day, but I believe they help us look at this game from an archaeological perspective. Archaeology is all about looking at the past, whether that be the recent past, ancient past, or sometime in between. And by doing so, we can see change as it occurred over time. In this video essay, I would like to focus on a few things. How Hollow Knight uses the past to craft a rich narrative-driven world, and how we as the players have to become like archaeologists to explore the past and uncover that rich narrative. This video will contain spoilers for the entire game. I may not touch on everything, but the main story and the history of the Hollow Knight world will be explored. So if you want to avoid spoilers, I would stop watching and go play the game for yourself, and then join me as I explore Hollow Knight's relationship with the past and the past's relationship with the player. Archaeogaming is a relatively new discipline within the world of archaeology. Archaeogaming itself is the archaeological process that studies archaeology relating to video games, both physically and digitally. Physically, archaeogaming can be something like the excavation of Atari burial site in New Mexico around 2014. This excavation revealed thousands of old Atari game system cartridges that were buried after the video game crash of 1983. Digitally, archaeogaming can be applied through a wider lens. For example, archaeogaming studies can include things like employing archaeological methods within game worlds, or the creation of video games for representation of archaeology or study. The most pertinent of these for us today is the use of archaeological processes by the player within Hollow Knight. Though the world of Hollow Knight, called Hallownest, does not explicitly make you aware that you are engaging in archaeological behavior, its use of things that we can associate with archaeology are ever present. Signs of long-lost civilizations, the ruins, statues commemorating a fallen king, plenty of ancient texts about civilizations, and even the dark secret pit of corpses sealed beneath the kingdom. You know, typical archaeological stuff. Throughout the game's main story, you are brought through several of these areas, but the ancient ruins and statues are rarely brought to the forefront of the action. They are usually resigned to be background details that you can interact with or theorize about, yet all of this is optional. Hallownest is quite literally full of secrets about the past, and the only way for us as players to learn about them is to purposefully seek out these artifacts. To better explain this concept of archaeogaming, I will provide an example from an article I read concerning this subject. The article is titled Artifact Assemblages and Context in Horizon Zero Dawn by Caitlin Kingsland from the website, accurately titled archaeogaming.com. This article talks a lot about how the world of Horizon Zero Dawn is full of different things pertaining to the ancient world. The ruins and artifacts of the ancient world are scattered throughout the game, and the player can analyze and explore them. In the article, Kingsland talks about how the act of artifact assemblage analysis is something that real-world archaeologists do whenever they excavate materials. This process is not explicitly present in the game, as this is not a game explicitly about archaeology, but the game presents the option to examine, analyze, and gather artifacts from these ancient sites. By doing this action, by actively participating in the exploration of the past through these artifacts, the player begins to have a more complete understanding of the game and the world that they are currently inhabiting. They see what makes it tick, how items have transformed over time, and their current use in the world. Kingsland describes it best by saying, the player inadvertently begins to think more archaeologically about the game world, and the developers place artifacts in an archaeological way. The player does not need to pay attention to these artifacts to progress the game at most points, but those who take the time to explore and pay attention are rewarded with a greater knowledge of the world's history. Now that we have established what archaeogaming is and how it is used in Horizon Zero Dawn, we can now look at how it is used in Hollow Knight. The main story of Hollow Knight is as follows. You, the player, plays as a little bug simply known as the Knight, who is quite literally dropped into an area called King's Pass after a short cutscene featuring a poem by a character referred to as Monomon the teacher. This poem is rather cryptic, and at the beginning of the game, you don't quite understand the context of it. Of course, like most things in the game, you can search for answers and piece it together. This is the point of the game where you start to see hints of the past, and you can begin to analyze them. Right at the very beginning of the game, you already see world building in action. The name of the poem, Elegy for Hallownest, is curious because an elegy is defined as being a poem of serious reflection, which is typically a lament for the dead. But who could this poem be about? When you actually take control of the night for the first time, you land in an area known as King's Pass, which acts as the tutorial stage for the game. Making your way through this area brings you finally to one of the many lore tablets that you will find present in the game, and the first one that really sheds some light on your present location and its history. The tablet reads as follows: Higher being, these words are for you alone. Beyond this point, you enter the land of King and Creator. Step across this threshold and obey our laws. Bear witness to the last and only civilization, the eternal kingdom, Hallownest. To spare you the mystery, this tablet introduces a number of things. Higher beings, the king and creator of Hallownest, and Hallownest itself. Hallownest is the civilization that a good portion of the game takes place in. Comprising of many areas, you get to see a very well interconnected civilization, or at least the remains of one. Sometime before the game takes place, Hallownest collapsed. The cause of this collapse is an infection that you learn about later. Throughout the game, you learn many things about Hallownest and the bugs that once lived there. And, oh yeah, I just realized, I forgot to mention that the entire world of Hollow Knight is populated by a bunch of sentient bugs and mushrooms. Anyways, you quickly learn about several key players in Hallownest, namely, the Pale King, the Dreamers, and the game's namesake, the Hollow Knight. While all of these figures are important, the entirety of this game's lore starts with the Pale King. The Pale King is a mysterious bug that appeared in Hallownest after wandering the wilds for some time. The Pale King is from a species known as a worm, which were seemingly capable of pulling bugs into their thrall. The Pale King himself was able to give sapience to the bugs living in Hallownest, which was not yet established as a kingdom. The Pale King possessed so much power, and he helped to build and develop Hallownest into a massive kingdom filled with bugs. The king was also very beloved, and there are countless items known as King's Idols, which were crafted in order to worship the Pale King. You can find these idols scattered around Hallownest, with each one being uniquely made for their previous owners. There are also several statues that can be seen in the Pale King's image, showing further worship and reverence for the king. Though the king ruled benevolently, eventually there was an infection that began to take hold of the citizens of Hallownest. This infection essentially turned the bugs into zombies and posed a massive threat to the kingdom. This is where the dark basement full of corpses come in. At some point in the game, the player is able to reach an area where you can see the corpse of a giant worm-type creature. This corpse is actually the previous form of the Pale King, because when the king arrived in Hallownest, he went through a rebirth to better fit the image of the bugs that he would be ruling. If you explore this corpse, you can find an item called the King's Brand, which then marks the player as the new king of Hallownest. With this brand, you can make your way to the most mysterious part of the game, the Abyss. The Abyss is a mysterious place filled with many corpses and a black substance known as Void. Down here, you can see that the Pale King was using his children in order to make vessels capable of sealing off the infection. After selecting the Hollow Knight, the Pale King sealed the Abyss as to never access such a terrible place again. The Hollow Knight sealed away the infection for a time, but eventually the kingdom would fall to its influence regardless. This leads to the disappearance of the Pale King and the palace, and leads to the utter annihilation of Hallownest, where only select few bugs remain. Now that I have explained all of that to you, we can begin to analyze it through our archaeological lens. Most of this information was already pieced together for us in an online archive, which is very convenient for accessing this information. This archive is an example of a paratextual archive created by an archontic fandom. This term was coined by Jansen Dennis and refers to the cyclical processing of recording, archiving, and interpreting a narrative universe. This idea of the archontic fandom can be applied to a great many games nowadays. For example, the Elder Scrolls games Skyrim and Morrowind have a great deal of fan engagement with their lore. There is even a whole archive called the Imperial Library that is devoted to keeping all the lore in a nice, convenient location. The Hollow Knight Wiki is the Hollow Knight version of the archontic fandom, especially the lore section. According to a section on the homepage of the lore in the Hollow Knight Wiki, it essentially acts as a disclaimer as well as an explanation of how all this knowledge was gathered. It reads as follows. The story of the Kingdom of Hallownest can be pieced together through dialogue, cutscenes, lore tablets, visual storytelling, and entries in the Hunter's Journal. While there are some ambiguous elements, in general, the information derived from these sources can provide a stable foundation for assembling the overall narrative. As long as all sources have been exhausted and taken into account, a player should, in their own right, have a general understanding of any lore topic. This statement is helpful because it shows that this information is present within the game itself, and you don't necessarily need to consult this archive in order to understand the lore of the world. By just exploring the world and consulting these tablets, cutscenes, and visual storytelling elements, you should be able to piece together Hallownest's past like a true archaeologist. I would like now to take some time to explore specific examples of how I channeled my inner archaeologist to uncover the lore in my playthrough. On the screen now you will be able to see an area of the game known as the White Palace. This is the final resting place of the Pale King. The palace is full of many dangers, especially the buzzsaws, but it is also filled with many secrets which help add some lore to the game. For example, near the king's throne room, through a secret passageway, there is a location known as the White Lady's Room, which refers to the Queen of Hallownest. This room is very melancholic in nature, and there's nothing to interact with. You have to observe and make sense of it on your own. The room is merely just to add lore and add some mystique. Since there is a somber ambience to the room, I believe that it was a study of some kind for the queen. Maybe she came here in order to get away and have some alone time. The architecture of the White Palace can be intimidating, so I would understand the need to get away. It is this kind of analysis that we, as archaeologically minded players, look for, and this is just one of many examples. Another moment in the game that is fairly devoid of inherent lore is the entirety of the Abyss. There is some lore surrounding it, left there by the king, but mostly it is up to our interpretation. There are certain statues present in the Abyss that could hint towards an even more ancient civilization taking root here. There is a room full of what appear to be screaming face statues. Are these statues that were carved here, or more sinisterly, is it possible that they are fossilized remains, stuck in their screams of terror as the Abyss set them in stone? This whole area is mysterious, eerie, and dark, which makes it terrifying to explore, and yet exhilarating to learn more about. You can actually find several artifacts here, and there is a super eerie room where you unite the Void and become essentially its ally. Though this may be leaning more into the supernatural side of archaeology now. Hollow Knight and its lore differentiate themselves from other games by putting much more emphasis on the visual design aspects of an interactive narrative. The two locations that I showed in the last part could not be more different in terms of aesthetics, and yet they come together in the fact that there wasn't some massive text entry detailing the entirety of the lore. At least, not in-game, that is. This is different from games like Subnautica, because Subnautica focuses a lot of its lore and history in written logs that can be found scattered throughout that world. Skyrim, Morrowind, and Horizon Zero Dawn are all very similar in that aspect as well. and while finding hidden text or written text isn't extremely uncommon in the field of archaeology, it is far more likely that you will stumble upon objects, structures, or statues. As an archaeological player, it is your job to be a part of that archontic fandom and, if only for yourself, chronicle your journey through these games. Not every player will have the exact same experience, because so much of the world building and lore of Hollow Knight is either hidden or in need of some serious archaeological analysis. To put my thoughts to close, I will look at the idea that Hollow Knight accidentally turns the player into a more archaeologically minded person through its use of world building. This idea is mentioned in a few of the articles that I read for this video, including the article Games We Dig, Skyrim, from the Value Foundation, and the article Artifact, Assemblages, and Context in Horizon Zero Dawn, which I have mentioned before. In Skyrim and Horizon, there are many different ways that the past gets communicated to you, the most prevalent of which are text-based. There are dungeons and ruins here and there that give a more visual and context-based perspective into the past, but these are a bit few and far between. However, in Hollow Knight, this is reversed. The written and spoken pieces of the past are present, yes, but the most important part to tie them all together comes from the player and their willingness to explore and piece together the past through the artifacts present. The statues and idols of the king hailing him as a god, the abyss and the signs of ancient civilizations, the corpses of countless bugs that tried in vain to fight the infection. These are all ways that we, as players, see into Hallownest's past, and it is up to us to either assemble and analyze these pieces, or just let them be lost to time. I believe that Hollow Knight represents one of the most developed examples of archaeogaming out there, and that by interacting with its world, you can get a better understanding of the techniques and responsibilities of real-world archaeologists. Though I am an amateur archaeologist at best, the archaeological mindset that Hollow Knight accidentally put me in made me much more invested in this world and its history than I would have been otherwise. Thanks for watching.